So Matt posted his weekly video, I think yesterday. Matt Dunstan, who is a really generous and impressive and talented designer, about burnout, and I wanted to just echo some of the things he said. Of course, I am someone who suffers from a lot of chronic mental and physical problems, so I definitely want more people to know about that and to talk about that. And that, of course, makes it harder for me to judge things like burnout because I don't know when it's burnout or when it's a chronic issue flaring up. But I do think it's really important to talk about this. I'm seeing more and more people being burnout. I'm seeing part of that trend, and I think Matt talked about this, is that we are doing a lot more work for less and less money. And less reward and things like that. And that's not necessarily anyone's fault, but it's something to be aware of. I'm also coming to this conversation from someone who hasn't really broken into tabletop board game design. So from my history, I have been a freelance role-playing game designer since 2002. And I was working as a journalist and other things before that. So I did a lot of freelance work. I've been running my own company, a very, very small company, since about 2018, and mostly in the role-playing area. And it's only in the last 6-7 years that I've been getting back into tabletop design and experimenting and trying to get into that. And I just want to echo that things are getting harder, and that's a little bit worrying to me. The Kickstarter that we ran in 2018, I don't think we would have succeeded if we ran it today. And that's partly because what's expected what's expected by customers is getting higher and higher. Customers are expecting, and just naturally, as Kickstarter has gone every single year, people have expected more and more value, more and more free things, and better production values. That's getting harder and harder to meet. And that is a much more competitive environment for all crowdfunding wherever you are. And this is part of that same trend where often companies are making less money and they're trying to get every bit of edge they can from working with designers, as Matt was talking about, and I think at the same time, for my experience, I coming in as someone who hasn't broken into tabletop design, I'm feeling a lot of pressure, and it might be imagined that my prototypes need to look better and be more developed and offer more before I take them to companies, because I know that other people are also making these steps and putting more and more money in and producing more and more flashy and high value components and things like that, and that adds a lot of extra pressure. So just as Matt was talking about putting in a huge amount of effort and time and then signing for royalties and the game just disappears, the same thing's happening where even though there are more and more games coming out, publishers are looking at more and more games. We have had a lot of reasons why it's easier and easier for people to become game designers. There are more and more things like the Game Crafter and Launch Tabletop to give you nicer prototypes. There's a lot of books and courses and free resources. I teach courses about game design. I've been making people game designers everywhere, and so there's more and more competition. And so just as you can pour years of work into a game and then it makes no money, you can pour years of work into a game and it's harder and harder for it to find a publisher, even if it's a very good game, even if you're picking the right market. And companies are becoming more conservative. So not only are they getting more pitches, they're becoming more risk averse because, as Matt said, it's harder and harder to predict these things. Even big companies are like, well, we want a smash hit. So I recently attended a pitching event that was online, and it cost quite a bit of money to go to this event, to try to make sure that everyone who was coming was serious, and I don't complain about that. But they also sent out their wish lists, and their wish lists are things like, we want it to be an instant hit, we want it to be extremely a viral game, it's got to have incredible table presence. It's got to be something that can be taught in 30 seconds, but also be played forever. And of course, these are all good things for games to have, but you can see that there's a sort of sense of desperation. Like the companies cannot take risks on games that aren't meeting all these criteria because they're competing against all these other things. And we're living in a general world where this is happening all over the arts world. I am connected to people in the filmmaking trade, and more, you can make a film for maybe 5-10 grand, and you can make a film for 100 million, but the films that were being made, in the past for 500,000, $1 million, $2 million, they don't exist anymore because it's too hard to take that kind of unpredictable risk on things that may or may not work out in a very fickle environment. With fiction, the same is also true. Companies are really picking, like, there's only a couple of genres that a lot of publishers are looking for, and they really want to focus on those. And if you're slightly outside that, you have a harder time getting ahead. And you're also expected in fiction to be doing a lot more work. When you go to a publisher, even though you're an unpublished author, the first thing they want to ask is, like, what's your internet presence like? What is your, how many followers do you have? And things like that. So that you're expected to bring this audience with you, which is what publishers used to always do. And more writers in fiction I'm seeing are actually choosing, because of this, to self-publish, because publishers are doing very little for them. They're not, you not only do you have to provide your own marketing, you're also often expected to pay towards the printing and do a lot of the sales yourself. You will get shipped books and expected to take them around to stores and events to sell the books. And increasingly, people are self-publishing as a result. And in the game industry, I think, we do a lot of self-publishing, but that has its own costs, with people burning out for different reasons, because we have a cottage industry in the game design industry where if you don't get signed by a publisher, you're expected to run your own business, and that means you have to do everything. You design, you develop, you might often do your art yourself, or you're the art director. You're in charge of layout and rules, and then you're in charge of marketing. You need to have a marketing strategy that begins years in advance. You're expected to be online constantly, promoting your game, taking it to every event you possibly can, getting it played everywhere you possibly can. And, all of this on one person's shoulders, running these businesses, doing the accounting, doing the legal. All of these things is just incredible amount of work on a person, as well as just the design. And so, if you are going down that route of self-publishing in the game design industry, it can be really rough, because you have to wear millions of different hats. You have to be a business manager, you have to be a marketer, you have to be a graphic designer, and you have to be a master of social media, and all of these things burn people out. Gil Hover is an incredible designer, but he burned out partly because when he did his High Rise Kickstarter, he was doing all of that stuff himself, and all of that organization was burning him out. And we've kind of, again, not for any bad reasons, the market isn't being unfair, but we expect a great deal from our game designers these days. And there's also a sort of, I guess, a sense of a level playing field where increasingly bigger companies are competing with very, very small companies in many ways, which means small companies have to look as if they're as big as those big companies, and try to match their production values, try to match their online, presences and things like that. And that is a hell of a thing to try to do when you're just one person, especially someone like me who has a lot of chronic health issues. So we are increasingly being asked to do more and more, whether it's presenting designing and developing and graphically presenting better and better prototypes. We're increasingly, and as Matt said, working as doing development with companies. If we sign, we're left on the hook. if we self-publish, we're having to do more and more and push harder and harder to get our audience and to get attention. I think possibly one of the things that we can do about this is maybe encourage people to sort of accept that there is an element of design of games that steps away from the sort of product cycle and the big money. One of the ways that I sort of got attention to my games in the past is just printing off 100 postcards and taking them to PAX and giving them away for free. I put a lot of games for free on Twitter when I was on there. I now post games for free on my Patreon and some for subscribers. And I'm trying to just concentrate on things that are low cost, high quality for people, and print and play is in this area as well. And I think there is a market for this. I think people are actually going, oh, actually I can do this myself, especially now when we have nice printers in lots of people's houses. And we can see this to some extent with things like the the Netrunner CCG being like run by a collective, and people just print the cards out, and nobody needs to go to the game store, but they can if they want. That model isn't going to obviously work for everyone. They have a huge audience, but it could be that your game, your path to success, is print this out in your home and play it at home, or this is a small box of cards and I've run off 20, 50, 100. People are doing smaller print runs these days, and just go, I'm going to just focus on this part. I'm just going to print 50 copies, and that's my success model now. Or I'm going to, make a game that is for a club or a group or something that sits with those people. There are ways to, I guess, think smaller but still have a big impact, and that might be something that we can do, because increasingly it's just getting harder and harder to get to more what traditionally we would consider the success. Like as Matt said, 15 years ago, you could bank on certain companies. You had more reliability. They had more reliability. And that path of build a good game, get some, test it, make some good mechanisms, doesn't have to be pretty, take it to a publisher, get signed, get royalties. That pathway is much less reliable now. And we've responded to that by trying to work harder and harder for less and less to try to get to that pathway. So we can structurally try to support each other in this. As an audience, we can be aware of how much work this takes. We can work with companies to try to support each other. But I think also we might have to just rethink our definition of the pathway to success and what we expect from our games, what we demand from our games. And I don't mean that you should ever have lower standards, but one of the ways that the film industry, dealt with this back in when blockbuster movies began to appear in the 70s and 80s is that the indie and art house film schools developed, and people were like, well, it doesn't have to cost $50 million. I want to see a film that was shot on a handy cam. I want to see a film that is made in the spare time of art students and things like that. And we might have just look around ourselves and go, maybe we don't need the deluxe version of PAX Premiere. We have a really brilliant strategy game that can be played with the things you have in your house. And it's not, many years ago, 30 years ago, cheap ass games did this really well, at a time when board games were quite expensive and beyond what a lot of people could afford. So this is nothing new. And there are great communities of print and play and people who love reskinning games, which I think is really interesting, because it becomes a creative exercise. Take a game you love and just do a completely redo of the graphics. So I'd like to, I think this is a really something we can explore, is to get ourselves away from stuff and get ourselves connecting with design and designers and rules and what they mean. And that allows our designers to focus on their real strengths and skills. It puts less pressure on the production cycle, and it puts less pressure on companies needing to make money to pay for all those things, and it just gives you another option. And that's always, I think, something I talk about a lot, is that it is always a puzzle trying to figure out how to take something you've designed and get it to an audience. And sometimes there are some very popular pathways. And I think what's happening, as I say, is that the pathway that was there 15 years ago is running into problems. And one thing that we can do is as much as we can support each other and as much as we can improve that pathway, we might have to redefine what we think of as success, what we think of as a high quality game, what we think of as something we want on our shelves, what we think of as how we interact with games, and be less about stuff and lots of boxes, and, find some other way to interact with games that's less about the physical media. So, that I don't have the answer for that. I don't know the future of that. But I think that's something we can think about, is like, how can we adapt or find new sort of pathways to success? And that starts at the audience level as well, so that we are not going back to that old model where all the pressure is, because there's only so much we can do to take the pressure off from that. I don't know if I'm burnout. I certainly feel a lot of pressure. The one thing I was also going to talk about is that when you are trying to break in, it's also really hard to face all these things, because every step you take and if you fail, you think, I have to work even harder. So I didn't get any of my games picked up. I've got to make them even better. I'll run through them again. I'll polish and refine and get better mechanics and better pieces, and I'll work on my pitch, and I'll pay someone to make a better video, and you hustle harder and harder when you fail. But when you succeed, you do the same thing as well, because you've gained a step and you go, well, I can't let go. I can't relax now. I've got a foot in the door. I've had a few good meetings with these people. I better be there next year so they see me again. I better bring a better game next year so they see me again. They've signed one game. I've got to get the next game. Last year, I was really sort of hitting a bit of a tipping point, and I ended up making something like 9 games. But every time I made one, it was like, well, now that I've got some momentum, I have to go further. So I think that's really important as well, that we talk about burnout for people who aren't yet in the industry, because I think it's actually much worse for you. I think it's much harder and there's much more pressure, because you feel like you can't rest on your laurels, and you're constantly told to hustle faster, work smarter, work harder, and every bit of failure makes you feels like you have to strive more. And every bit of success feels like you have to capitalize it and push and push and push, so that you don't get forgotten, so that you build on that. And people might be counting on you, like your co-designers or the little audience you have. You desperately don't want them to drain away. So it's really, really hard for people in that position as well. And if you are in that position, as Matt said, the best thing we can do is talk about it. You don't have to qualify as someone who's had like X titles published to weigh in on this conversation, because we're all, artists working towards solving that puzzle. And shout out to people like me who are still trying to sort of get that foothold and get that sense of achievement. And it's really hard, and it's a lot of pressure, and it's really tiring. And come talk to me about it, Find me at a con. That's the thing that we all have, is each other. And that's what really helps with these things, I think, is supporting each other and building community. That's all from me. Thanks for Matt for bringing it up. Keep talking about it. Post here, share links. See ya.